It seems as though younger generations, including my own, have a lot of grievances with work and don't really have much of a work ethic. Not everybody, of course, there are exceptions to this rule, otherwise, nothing would get done. But what's been worrying me for the past several months is seeing a lack of work ethic in American society. And many of them have grievances, some that I think are legitimate and others that don't seem to be. So I wanted to break it down to the three basic points that I've seen people make and the three basic arguments that I've seen people make when it comes to why work is essentially bad in 2023. So I'm going to go through it one point at a time, try to address where I think it's legitimate or where I think it might not be legitimate. And I've only got 3 points, so I'll go through them one at a time here. The first point is the workplace is toxic. Now, this point to me is very innocuous. It could mean anything. There's a legitimate side to that, but there's also an illegitimate side to that. My experience with work, there are people who just aren't good to work with. They're miserable all the time because of one reason or another, and they bring that misery with them to work and they inflict it on everybody else. That's not a good work environment. And you don't want a company that encourages that. The company that I worked for discouraged that strongly, and they were able to create an environment where that was very rare. There were still some people who were just miserable to customers and to other employees. That's just how some people are, and that's the unfortunate reality, is some people go through life with a chip on their shoulder. But there are also people who are in positions of management and upper management who are under a tremendous amount of pressure, and as a result they end up taking it out on their employees, which is never okay. Under any circumstances they should never do that, but the pressure is so much that they end up doing it, so they end up treating their employees worse as a general result of that. But the thing is, when I hear somebody from Gen Z or my generation talk about a toxic workplace, a lot of times it might just be they're told to do something with a level of authority and they don't want to do it, and that person is talking to them like a child. Seems like they're talking down to them, but they're really trying to just convey this thing needs to be done this way at this point and at this time, and if you can't do that, you can't keep your job, because that's your responsibility. They just don't want to be responsible because they spent a lot of their lives having other people be responsible for them. That's a real phenomenon. And I know a lot of people don't like being accused of that. I understand. But there are some people who are genuinely guilty of going into work and doing the bare minimum that they're asked to do, and finding excuses as to why not to do what they're told they need to be done by the people who have the authority to tell them that. They go in thinking, you can't tell me what to do. I'm going to do whatever it is I'm going to do. I'm going to waste the company's time all I want because, I don't want to be here, but I need to be here to pay my bills. So you're entitled to just pay me. I don't have to actually do anything, which is a horrible mentality. I would never hire a person who thought that way. That's not a person who's going to produce anything of worth to the company, And unfortunate reality is there's more people who think like that than not, and it's a real problem. And I think more people need to address that, as opposed to just going, you're right, workplaces are toxic and we need to fix the workplaces, because that seems to be the mentality that's happening, is we need to fix these toxic workplaces. But if your definition of toxicity comes from your own perception as opposed to what's actually there, and it doesn't always, like I said before, there are times when there is a genuine toxic workplace situation or employee. And I hate the term toxic, by the way. It's just such a generic term to wave away bad behavior, But if there is a workplace environment that's unhealthy, it does need to be addressed. But more often than not, somebody can create a toxic workplace by not doing their responsibilities and causing problems for other people. And sometimes that's managers, sometimes that's employees, sometimes it's a combination of the two. People working together, no matter what, is going to be messy, because people are people. People don't always get along. You barely got along with people in school or people in your own family. When people interact with each other, it's a problem. And one of the things with COVID is people don't want to go back to work. When people got a taste of working from home, they didn't want to go back to work, but Companies understand that people working together, when it works, it creates synergy, it creates better productivity, and all that sort of thing. But people are saying, no, I don't want to do that because I don't want to deal with people. When you've got a generation that doesn't want to deal with people, it's losing its humanity. You're gonna have to deal with bad people who say bad things. You're gonna have to deal with that. That's just a reality of life. If you're not willing to accept that reality of life, then go live in a pod, which I guess we're not too far from anyway. So there is legitimacy at some points to the claims of toxic work environments, depending on what the circumstances are. But they're usually very specific circumstances, and more often than not, it's just people's perception of their workplace and the bad experiences they have within their workplace. So you got to be careful one way or another, because it's hard to tell. I can't judge your individual experience. Only you know what you've been through. But I will tell you that there are a growing number of people who they perceive their work environment to be worse than it is because they're not willing to do their part. And other people call them out on that. And so they perceive everybody else around them as the problem. Don't ignore that. That's a real thing that's happening. All right, so the second point is, number 2, I'm working for nothing. Basically, the company isn't paying me enough that I need to survive, and I'm not able to survive. I'm not able to pay my bills. I'm not able to take care of my family if I should have a family. Here's the thing about that, okay? We are in a horrible economy. There's no questioning that. We are in a terrible economy. Companies pay their employees what they can afford to pay them and what they're legally allowed to pay them. That's the bottom line. The reality is that you and I live radical lifestyles. We have the radical freedom to live however we want to live. And a lot of people choose not to live within their means. They choose to buy stuff now and then spend the rest of their life paying for it. That's not, in my opinion, that is not a smart way to live. You don't want to just buy what you can't afford and spend the rest of your life doing that, because you're going to be working just to pay those things off and you can't afford the essentials. That's a problem that goes largely unaddressed, is people living outside of their means. You've got to live within your means, and sometimes that means living in crappy environments, driving a crappy car, doing whatever it is you need to do to survive until you can work your way out of that. And some people say, well, I can't work my way out of that. Well, you really, if you're devoted to it, you can. And it's going to take a lot of back-breaking work and sacrifice, and who knows what you might lose. But at the end of the day, I do believe that you can, because plenty of people have. Plenty of people have managed to work their way from rags to stability. You can make the argument that the middle class is being erased in America, and there is definitely some truth to that, and that goes back to the whole economic situation, and that goes back to a lot of people's voting choices. Are they voting for people who are devoted to fixing the economy and making it so that there can be a middle class? Or are they voting for people who just care about social issues? Really think about these issues when you go to the polls, and really pay attention to what people are saying about these issues and hold them to account. Plain and simple. But the fact of the matter is if you're more concerned about social issues than you are about the economy, then you're going to spend the rest of your life living in squalor. Plain and simple. But the solutions to that are often political, and they're a lot bigger than just your employer. It's not your employer's fault that they can't afford to pay you what you feel you deserve. Your employer pays you what they feel they can pay you, and legally the minimum that they're allowed to pay you. But people want to act like the evil corporations are just hoarding all of their money and trying to not pay their employees. That's not true. Do you know how expensive it is to run a business, especially a multi-billion-dollar business? They hear multi-billion-dollar business and they think that can cover absolutely everything. But you would be surprised how little of that they can actually afford to use to pay employees when everything is said and done, when all of the other expenses are considered. Because especially in a bad economy, you want to keep a multi-billion-dollar business that's near global afloat, something has to pay for everything. Those billions have to be split between everything. They're not just holding out on you because they want to. Oh, but you've got these CEOs with multi-million dollars and all of that. Yeah, that's what those CEOs earn, because they have to be in charge of hundreds of thousands of employees, of properties, of vehicles, of thousands of different, hundreds of not thousands of different aspects of a company. That's what they have to be in charge of. That's what they have to manage at the end of the day. You only have to manage and work towards your own small part of a given store or given operation. They have to oversee the whole dang thing. Of course they're going to be paid more, and quite a bit more at that. So you might think it's unfair, but their responsibilities are quadruple yours. Plain and simple. Oh, why can't they afford to pay them less? Because who's going to take on the responsibilities of a CEO for less than a CEO's salary? Would you? If you were in a CEO position, would you want to be paid minimum wage, or would you want to be paid a CEO's wage? Ask yourself that question, because it absolutely applies. So, I mean, ultimately, I think that point is, I mean, it's another one that's mixed, because you're not really working for nothing. It's just how you're choosing to live. It all comes down to how you're choosing to live and how you budget. Do people know how to budget anymore? You got to know what you can afford each month, and you might have to live without some things. In some cases, you might have to live really tough without some essentials, and that's a problem for sure. But you might just have to do it to survive, and it might not be forever. And you might have to take on an extra job just to make those ends meet, even if you're living within your means. It's just because we're in a horrific economy. I was at the grocery store the other day. It's hard to buy 5 items for less than $30. In some cases now it's more than $30. People have to take, there's a joke, people have to take out loans to buy eggs. It's almost not a joke anymore. We need people who are willing to absolutely fix this economy so people can start working towards meaningful pay and being able to have their money last. But as it stands right now, their money just evaporates into whatever it is that they need. Disposable income is being erased. And that's going to affect these companies in a massive way, So we need to find a way to turn around this economy. Again, it's more of an economic thing than a greed thing. Absolutely. And then the final point, which is the one that I think I have the most grievance with, but there is an exception, and I will get into that. And that is point number 3, work is slavery. You've got a generation of people who think that because they have to work for a living, that is somehow slavery, even though it's completely voluntary. You don't have to work, but the consequences of not working are you don't get a home, you don't get a car, you don't get food. Every single generation that has existed, whether they were hunter-gatherers or your traditional workers, have had to do some form of work to survive. It's just essential to human survival. We don't get to have everything handed to us on a silver platter. Plain and simple. Even the people who live in the lap of luxury, they only are in the lap of luxury because somebody had to work hard. Either they had to work hard themselves or they were able to inherit it. And sometimes their inheritance dries up and they have to work. At the end of the day, as a human being, you have to work, whether it's to maintain yourself, the dwelling in which you live, everything that you have. You know, work is essential to humanity. You don't get to just sit there and say, well, work is slavery. Slavery is not voluntary. Work is. The definition of slavery is indentured servitude. You don't even get paid. You just work, in many cases to death. That's why slavery is so terrible. It's indentured servitude. And it's still going on all over the world. But where it's not going on are people choosing to sign up to work at Walmart. And yes, working at Walmart can be miserable. I had a friend who, or actually, you know the friend, Zetro, who was on the podcast. He worked at Walmart for many years. I don't know if he's still there, but he can tell you how miserable it was. But he would have never said it was slavery, because that's just a bizarre, ridiculous concept. It's not slavery. You're volunteering to work there for a certain amount of pay. Ultimately, those types of work environments end up not being very good because it's for low pay and it's not in good conditions. It's just the nature of the job. There are some people who can make lemons out of lemonade in that situation and, you know, be a better worker and create a better environment. But, you know, it's not exactly a glamorous job. It's not a job designed for you to live off of. In the modern day, at least, people say, well, back in the day, you could work a job like that. Yeah, back in the day. But the economy has so radically shifted, it's not the case anymore. And again, when it comes to the economy, that's a question of what people are willing to vote for. I just wish I could get it through so many people's heads that a lot of what they're experiencing is what they vote for on a presidential level, on a state level. All of these things affect the greater communities around them. They're more concerned about voting on social issues than they are on the actual things they need to survive. It drives me insane. But I mean, this last point is largely nonsensical. I will tell you the one aspect that it's not, because I said it would, is when people say, I don't want to sacrifice my body, which could technically be a fourth point if I wanted it to be. Where people will say, I'm working day in and day out, a hard physical labor job, and I don't want to grow old to the point where my legs and arms and back don't work. I understand this. There was a generations who did that. The boomer generation, a lot of them did that because they didn't have the luxury of many technologies. So a lot of the physical labor they did was hard. And their parents had to do it even harder, you know, with working in mines and all sorts of different manual labor jobs. It used to be men only worked manual labor jobs. That's all there were. There was a time where there were no office jobs. And when there were, they were often given to women. At first they were given mostly to men, but then when women started entering the workforce, that's what they had as well. And they worked in things like textile mills and, you know, call centers and all of this sorts of things. All of those sorts of things, rather. You know, work has changed and has evolved, but there are generations who that's the only job options they have. And my grandfather, he could hardly stand up straight. His legs were completely shot. He had to walk with a cane. The entirety of my life, he had to walk with a cane. He passed in 2012, may he rest in peace. On my grandfather on my mom's side, I didn't know my grandfather on my dad's side. He died in the 80s. I was born in 92. But even as I look at pictures of my grandfather on my dad's side, he was pretty beat up too. I mean, these men worked hard, physical labor, and they sacrificed their body as a result just so their kids could have something better. And people are saying, no, I refuse to do that if I've got the option. And you know what? If you've got the option, then good for you. Some people don't have the option. There are still places in the world where men don't have the option to work a simple desk or office job. You know? But that is a point that I understand. I don't know if that's a good argument for work being slavery, but I understand because the last job that I worked, I was severely underprepared for the physical requirements of the job. I was severely underprepared. I did good for the first several months, but then it started to really take its toll on my body. I'm not in shape, so having to lift 400 or 500 pounds a day, over 400 or 500 pounds a day, started to really take its toll. My legs and feet would hurt so stinking bad that even on my days off, I would still be feeling it. You know, going upstairs, it was a nightmare. And I loved that job, and I didn't want to leave it, but I couldn't. Even as I worked part-time, even for that short period of time, it was so intensive some days that I physically couldn't keep up with the demands because I just wasn't in shape. And it would take me a year or two to get to the point where I could even reasonably handle it. And even if I could, I don't know that I want to do that to my legs and back. I just don't. And there's so many risks of if you bend the wrong way. We had a lot of training that said you have to bend a certain way, you have to squat a certain way in order to do this. It was heavy stuff. It was wine and beer, and we would get it in bulk. There would be days where it would come in shipped on huge pallets, and we'd have to unpack those big pallets, and it would be the day that nobody looked forward to because everybody would go home in pain. There are people who are cut out for that, though. There are people who are absolutely built for that. We need those people in order to keep those store shelves stocked. I respect those people. Every time I see a stocker in a grocery store now, I always pull them aside and go, hey, how you doing? You know, not to try to interrupt their work, but to tell them I appreciate that because it is hard work, and there's even harder work than that. So I understand physically people wanting to preserve their body into old age. Sometimes it's just not possible, and that's just the reality you got to deal with. But I completely understand people who are making a conscious effort to have a functioning body for when they have grandkids. I get that. I completely get that. But that's just kind of its own point. I should have probably made that point number 4, but this thing wasn't very well planned out. I do these off the cuff whenever there's a topic that I want to discuss. But work is not slavery, okay? Unless you're working somewhere without pay, which, by the way, is illegal in America, unless it's voluntary. But if you're working somewhere without pay, like hard, for a major corporation, I mean, that's slavery. But because they're paying you and they're agreeing to pay you this much, then it's not slavery. You might not be making as much as you need. Well, then maybe you need to get an extra job. And people don't want to do that because they want to spend time with their friends and family. I get that, but welcome to the economy we're in. Does anybody care about the economy? When you're thinking about the next presidential election, whatever president says, I'm devoted to fixing the economy, and they make that a talking point, that's who you need. It doesn't matter what their personality is. It doesn't matter what their other policies are. If that's what matters to you, then you need to vote for that. And I think a majority of people are going to vote for that, regardless of who it is. If they're sincere about actually fixing the economy, that's exactly what they'll go for. You know, that's your responsibility as a voter. We don't teach kids civics anymore, and it's crazy because voting in state and federal elections has just become a popularity contest, and that's never how it should be. That's never what it was designed to be. The founders wanted people to vote with a level of education because people were smarter back then. People were more well-read back then, generally. The people who weren't really didn't survive. You can be an idiot and survive in today's world, which is crazy. Although I think that's becoming less and less possible as the economy gets bad. As things start to get worse, you're gonna see people forced to change a lot of their ways. You really are, because it's getting so bad. Again, spending $40 for 6 or 7 grocery items, it's crazy. And part of that is on me. Part of that, I could save money if I shopped at different places, if I bought more things at, say, the dollar store or a grocery outlet. But buying regular stuff at the grocery store is getting very expensive, and a lot of people are going to have to do that. They're going to have to buy more store brand. Excuse me. I don't know what's going on. I got over my sinus infection. They're going to have to buy more store brand stuff. They're going to have to cut more corners. They're not going to be able to have the luxuries that they want. And that's what I'm starting to realize. So for me, I'm just going to have to, find ways to spend less. You got to adjust your lifestyle based on what your budget is and based on what you can afford based on your work. And if you feel like you want to make more, then you might need to take on a second job and sacrifice all your free time to do that. But there are people who aren't willing to do that. Younger generations feel like, no, I shouldn't be able to do that. Well, it sucks, but welcome to reality. You have to do things. How many times did you hear growing up, sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do? If you never heard that growing up, then your parents failed you. My parents told us that all the freaking time. They told us there's sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do. I heard it when it came to going to church, because there were days I didn't want to go to church. Oh, well, sometimes you got to do things you don't want to do. And some people would turn around to my parents, oh, that was abusive for them to do that to you. That was abusive for them to force you to go to church. No, it wasn't. Their ideology was they wanted to love and serve the Lord, and they wanted us to learn to love and serve the Lord and learn what that was about. And it was about being a family and being a united family unit and doing what mom and dad said to do. Plain and simple. It wasn't abusive. There wasn't anything abusive about it. It was an expectation of the parents. Kids should strive to meet their parents' expectations. There are some parents who have expectations that aren't good, that aren't reasonable, but going to church is not unreasonable. Not at all. Going to school is not unreasonable, even though I've got my feelings towards the public school system. Boy howdy, I'll have to make that video at some point. But being obedient to your parents is not unreasonable, especially if your parents have reasonable authority, which mine did. Some don't have reasonable authority. Some are incredibly abusive, and they just want their kids to be something very, very specific, and they're willing to abuse their kids to get them there, and it's sick. I mean, again, that's a whole nother video for another day. But overall, younger generations have always, there's always been older generations who feel that younger generations aren't doing their part, they aren't doing enough. But we're seeing a genuine problem when we go out into the real world and places have to close early because they don't have enough help, because there's people not willing to come in. There's a significant work ethic problem. And I want to know what you think in the comments down below. What do you think about younger generation's work ethic? What have you seen? Have you seen the good? Have you seen the bad? Where do you think this is all headed? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Super Koopa TV with another Koopa Talks, and I will see you guys next time. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.